Greetings, everyone, and thank you for participating today. This session is taking place on July 15th, 2022. It is being recorded, and it will be available on the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center's YouTube page. So you'll be able to find it there for viewing on demand and able to share it with others for those who are not able to participate live today. The reason for the webinar today marks the debut of the third segment of the third of four segments of this comprehensive online exhibit about baseball and the Knights of Columbus, the intertwined histories of both. I want to say greetings and thank you to researcher and writer Andy Fowler, who has assembled all of these presentations. Andy, although you and I root for rival baseball teams, we do share a love for the history and the lore of baseball, as well as for the Knights of Columbus. And speaking for myself, I just find continually amazing all of these little touch points through time that America's Pastime shares with our beloved order, the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter, so much for welcoming me back to talk more about baseball. Yeah, it's just one of the fascinating things about the Knights of Columbus and baseball. It seems like at every juncture there's a Knight of Columbus that's influencing the game, or the order as a whole. So it's how we introduced the exhibit, saying the story of baseball can be told with the tip of the cap to the Knights of Columbus. It's still evident in this part of the exhibit as well, but it's more so about individual knights, but also the order. Which fun factoids coming up. So
terrific.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, for those who are participating live, I want to remind you that at the side of your screen, you should find a question utility. I think there's a little question mark icon there. And if you have any questions that are prompted through the presentation or perhaps just in general, feel free to use that question utility. I'll monitor it throughout Andy's talk, and then at the conclusion, select from among the questions, and Andy and I will go over them and address them. So we're grateful again for your participation. Andy, I am going to go radio and TV silent. I'm going to shut off my webcam and mute myself and give you over control of the program so that we can learn a little bit more about today's premiere.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you for everyone who's here or watching later on YouTube. These have been fun to do, and I can't wait to share with you the sneak peek into part 3 of KFC Baseball: An American Story, which is an online exhibit at the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center. But before I dive into third base, I'd like to quickly recap what's been in the exhibit so far. So first base was released in October 2021 to coincide with the Major League Baseball playoffs. And that section explored the origins of baseball as an American phenomenon, but also in relation to the Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus founder, Father Michael J. McGivney, played the game and used it as a way of bringing his parish communities together. And councils used it as a way of promoting fraternity at the turn of the 20th century. And additionally, first base touches on the giants of early baseball, including Hall of Famers like Connie Mack, John McGraw, Nap Lajoie, among many, many others. Meanwhile, second base was released at the start of this baseball season and focused on the order's work of bringing baseball to servicemen in World War I, the role in salvaging the game's reputation during the Black Sox scandal, as well as the impact and faith journey of probably one of the most famous members of the Knights of Columbus, Babe Ruth. And the final chapter, which will be called Home, is scheduled to be released this fall to also coincide with the MLB playoffs. So there's still more to come if you have a hankering for more baseball after exploring third base. But I'd like to start with another famous member of the Knights of Columbus who made a tremendous impact on the game and American culture in the mid-20th century, the Yankee Clipper himself, Joltin Joe DiMaggio. Now, DiMaggio was the son of Italian immigrants and born on November 25th, 1914 in Martinez, California. He quickly became interested in baseball, wanting to do something other than the working class life like his father. And DiMaggio became a sought-after phenomenon after hitting safely in 61 games for the San Francisco Seals back in 1933. He was touted by the Yankees as the quote-unquote next Babe Ruth that would lead the franchise to more baseball glory. But right before the 1939 season, the year he won his first of 3 MVPs, DiMaggio joined the Knights of Columbus, and Columbia Magazine actually covered the event. So this is the blurb. DiMaggio taking his first degree on February 15th, 1939. He joined the Dante Council 2563, which was formerly out in San Francisco, but sadly no longer exists. But he was joined by another player named Ted Jennings, who also played for the Seals, although Jennings never made it to the majors. I did look up if DiMaggio's brothers were also members of the Knights, but sadly there's nothing out there, at least yet. But unfortunately, DiMaggio didn't do as much charitable activities as with the Knights, unlike Babe Ruth. But DiMaggio was definitely more reserved than the great Bambino in that regard. But he did his share of charitable activities, and as well as spoke at about baseball at Knights of Columbus events. But what made DiMaggio the household name he is today? What made him legendary? It was the streak. So between May 15th and July 17th, 1941, Joltin Joe was not only the talk of the town, but the country. There's a vignette in the Ken Burns baseball documentary where one of the interviewees shared a story about how people used to simply say, "Did he get another hit? Did he get another one?" Without going into detail of like the who, what, where, how, why, but the impression being everyone knew who you were talking about. And there's even a song, which I won't sing right now. I don't want to hurt our audience's ears too much, but it all the more made DiMaggio more than just a great Yankee. It made him an American icon. And the streak had simple origins, to say the least. It began with an RBI single off Eddie Smith of the Chicago White Sox. And the Yankees were under 500 at the time, so their season got off to a rocky start. But DiMaggio's bat really jump-started the team. And you can see his stats here: 56 singles, 16 doubles, 4 triples, 15 home runs in that span. And this boosted the Yankees from 4th to 1st in the American League. So his 56-game hitting streak actually crushed the previous record of 45 games, which was held by another Knight of Columbus, Wee Willie Keeler. The thing is, after DiMaggio went hitless on July 17th against the Cleveland Indians, which is when the streak ended, he quickly began a 16-game hitting streak. So, you know, the record is unbreakable as it is right now, but can you imagine if it was more than 70 games? And for context, the closest anyone has ever gotten to breaking the record since was Pete Rose when he hit 44 games in 1978. But DiMaggio was more than just a one-hit wonder, so to speak. At the end of his illustrious career, he amassed 361 home runs, more than 2,000 hits, lifetime batting average of 325, and won 9 World Series titles. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1955, and he was dubbed the quote-unquote greatest living ball player by sports writers in 1969, which he insisted on being introduced as throughout the rest of his life. So I don't think anyone would consider Joe DiMaggio to be a humble man, so to speak, but it's still impressive to be thought as such in an era that had the likes of Mickey Mantle, Hank Aaron, Ted Williams, and Willie Mays, who probably eclipsed Joe in a lot of the statistical categories, but yet, he had the streak. So it's interesting to see a Knight of Columbus make such an impact like that on the game and have such a record that is touted as one of the most unbreakable records in baseball. and in sports. But shifting gears now, as noted in second base, baseball was a major part of the Order's wartime efforts during the First World War. And as the Knights of Columbus viewed the sport, baseball was a reminder of home and a distraction from the battlefield. So, however, in World War II, the USO handled larger scale recreational activities for soldiers abroad that the KFC provided during the First World War. Yet, Knight of Columbus, Henry Zeke Benura, a former Major League star, helped introduce the American national pastime to countries around the world, similar to the KCs of World War I, like Johnny Evers. Benura played first base for the Chicago White Sox, managed by Knight of Columbus Jimmy Dykes, for a majority of his 7 years in the majors. He was known as a power hitter, but a clumsy defenseman. And by the time he was drafted by the Army in 1941, his career in the majors had been slipping away, unfortunately. So by September 1941, he arrived at Camp Shelby in Missouri, serving as an assistant to the camp's athletic director, organizing intramural baseball leagues for the servicemen. So this stint in the military was initially short-lived. Since he was older than 28, Benura was honorably discharged on December 5th, 1941, so 2 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor. So after the attack, however, his services were quickly recalled, and he once again went to Camp Shelby to help organize baseball games. And it was during this return his organizational skills began to quote unquote flourish, according to playing for their nation, baseball, and the American military during World War II. So under his leadership, a new field was built, and he procured equipment from major league teams to help the camp's baseball league thrive. And when the Allied forces invaded northern Africa, Benura was sent overseas to Oran, Algiers, not to fight, but to continue organizing games for the troops. So during this time, he was, quote unquote, extremely productive, supervising more than 1,000 players on hundreds of teams that were divided into 6 leagues. He taught the game not only to French and Arab forces, even while the threat of German military attacks loomed over the baseball fields and military bases. He also helped organize what was called the North African World Series, which was played against the Casablanca Yankees versus the Algiers Streetwalkers. But soldiers ended up calling him the, quote, Judge Landis of North Africa, after Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was then commissioner of Major League Baseball. His work was widely praised, including by General Dwight Eisenhower, who personally presented to Benura the Legion of Merit. So, but as Axis forces were pushed out of northern Africa into Italy and France, Benura followed, organizing sports leagues in France. But by the time he left the army in September 1945, he was considered the, quote, preeminent promoter of military athletics during the war, and was nicknamed the Tsar of North African baseball. So, but unfortunately, Benura never made it back to the show. However, he did breed championship dogs, so there's more on that in the gallery of third base. But no discussion about the history of baseball can avoid the awful, what is now called the color barrier. But to summarize what that meant, for those who might not be aware, the National and American League owners restricted and prevented blacks from playing in Major League Baseball by, quote, a gentleman's agreement. They wouldn't outrightly ban their participation in the rules, unlike the International League did in 1887, but they did so effectively without a rule on the books. But I don't want to overstate the Knights of Columbus's involvement in the eventual breaking of the color barrier, but there were at least several efforts that show the order's consistent promotion of racial equality. With that, we start with James O'Rourke. You might remember him from first base. He was the first man in National League history who hit safely. Well, he had a small role in advancing minorities in baseball while he managed the Bridgeport Baseball Club in the Connecticut State League back at the turn of the 20th century. They were initially called the Victors, the Misfits, and then the Orators, which was O'Rourke's nickname. But in 1895, O'Rourke hired Harry Herbert, a black man, for a spot on the team. From what we could find, Herbert became the first African American from Bridgeport to play professional baseball, and he also might be the first African American in the minors. Unfortunately, though, Herbert never played in the majors, and his stats are pretty incomplete. But this is a minor episode, but it's noteworthy enough that I think it's worth recognizing of a Knight of Columbus trying to reach out and provide an opportunity for blacks to play baseball, to participate in America's pastime. But a more high-profile effort to integrate blacks into baseball was orchestrated by Knight of Columbus John McGraw when he managed the Baltimore Orioles. Before spring training 1901, the manager of the Baltimore Orioles met Charlie Grant, an African-American ball player, in the resort town of Hot Springs, Arkansas. McGraw obviously saw talent in Grant and conspired with the player to circumvent the so-called gentleman's agreement and pose Grant as a Native American named Charlie Tuckahoma. Grant went along with the ruse, even so far as telling an interviewer that his mother was of Cherokee descent and his father was white. For a time, the charade worked, and Grant was poised to be a member of the Orioles until the team arrived in Chicago. Grant was already known in the city, but the writers of Baseball and Illustrated History suggest that Grant was, quote, exposed when black friends offered him congratulations that proved too public. But other scholars, including those from SABR, suggest the Chicago Tribune alerted the American League president Ban Johnson and owners of the ruse. But however the ruse unfolded, McGraw eventually relented to mounting pressure, leaving Grant off the opening day roster. And McGraw died February 25th, 1934, and wouldn't live to see Robinson break the color barrier. But according to Baseball in Illustrated History, after McGraw's death, his widow reportedly found a list of all these black players the Hall of Fame manager wished he could have signed. So did McGraw truly believe in racial equality, or did he simply want better players than other teams? We can't know for sure, but the fact that he tried, albeit unsuccessfully, to reach out speaks at least to an openness, a desire to providing opportunities for black players. But the color barrier wouldn't be broken until Jackie Robinson started first base for the Brooklyn Dodgers on April 15th, 1947. We all know he faced racism, discrimination, and death threats with a heroically restrained temper. But one of the earliest tests to restrain himself came less than a week into the 1947 season when the Dodgers played the Philadelphia Phillies. So in the city, ironically, in the city of brotherly love, the Phillies and their manager, Ben Chapman, verbally abused and racially taunted Robinson. And the abuse reportedly almost drove Robinson to the quote, brink of abandoning the noble experiment in pacifism. But Robinson's teammate, Eddie Stanky, a member of the Knights of Columbus, stepped in. And Stanky shouted down the Phillies, calling them cowards, saying, why don't you go to work on somebody who could fight back? And you might recognize this event, in the movie 42 with Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford. But initially, Stanky, who was from the deep, deep South, didn't like Robinson toward the beginning of the season. He even petitioned Dodgers general manager Branch Rickey to trade him rather than play with a black teammate. But however, as a testament to his character growth, Stanky eventually became one of Robinson's earliest backers. And according to Saber, Stanky's stand against the Phillies' bombardment of racial insults actually truly united the Dodgers as a team behind Robinson. So, and it's also worth noting, after Robinson finished his storied career, the members of the order wanted to honor the man who broke the color barrier. So, along with other groups, the Knights of Columbus co-sponsored the quote interfaith baseball game on May 14, 1957, at Griffith Park Stadium in Washington, D.C. But the game only lasted 2 innings due to rain. But it goes to show the consistent outreach the order made to minorities throughout the early to mid 20th century. There's a great Columbia article linked in the exhibit that goes into the order's work in furthering civil rights if you want to learn more. But now we switch gears to one of the more intriguing factoids of the Knights of Columbus and its ties to baseball, specifically its association with Yankee Stadium. But so a little bit of backstory first. So prior to the Yankees having their own ball yard, the team played home games at the Polo Grounds, which was the home of the New York Giants. And funny enough, when Ruth played his first season as a Yankee in 1920, attendance was actually higher at Yankee games than at Giants games, which rubbed John McGraw the wrong way. So the Giants insisted the Yankees find a new place to call home, but as it turned out, the Yankee owners were in the process of doing that already. They ended up building what at the time was the largest ballpark in the country, which was 62,000 seats. And the first game was played on April 18th, 1923. So fun fact about that game, Knight of Columbus, Al Smith, who was governor of New York, threw out the first pitch, and Babe Ruth gave the fans what they wanted to see, a 3-run homer that was the deciding factor in the game. But the Knights of Columbus's ties to the ballpark wouldn't be fully realized until December 1953, when the order purchased the land of Yankee Stadium as part of a leaseback investment. So at the time, Supreme Knight Luke Hart said it was, of course, the largest check I ever signed. And the rationale to purchase the land was not only good business, but as a way of promoting the order. So to increase its visibility, attract new members, and therefore further the mission of Father Michael J. McGivney. But by my observations, the Knights of Columbus might be the only Catholic organization to own any part of a major league ballpark. But that hasn't been confirmed yet. But if it's not the only, they are the most prominent, I would say. So from 1954 to 1971, the Knights of Columbus, owned the land to the to Yankee Stadium. So not the stadium itself, just the physical field. And the Yankees were a powerhouse during that period, winning 4 World Series titles and 9 pennants. However, the order had to eventually relinquish the land to the city of New York due to eminent domain. But it should also be noted that the order also supported several papal masses that happened at the old Yankee Stadium. First with Pope Paul VI Mass on October 4th, 1965. Then with Pope John Paul II on October 2nd, 1979. And then Pope Benedict XVI on April 20th, 2008. And the Knights of Columbus commemorated these historic moments with plaques like you see here in the photo. You see Bishop Charles P. Greco, who is the Knights of Columbus's Supreme Chaplain. You see Supreme Knight John McDevitt, Yankee General Manager Daniel Topping Jr., Yankee pitcher Steve Hamilton, and White Sox manager Eddie Stanky, the latter two who were members of the Knights of Columbus. But these are, so it should also be mentioned that these plaques are still in Monument Park at Yankee Stadium. This is me at a game last September. So the next time you go to Yankee Stadium, make it sort of a pilgrimage. It's there is still a tangible presence of the Knights of Columbus at Yankee Stadium. So with that, I'll end my ramblings, but but rest assured, there are a lot more neat nuggets in third base, but I'll let you discover those on your own time. But thank you for all those who are listening live or later on YouTube. And for those that have been following along since October, thank you. And if this is your first time, I hope you dive in deep like I have, and I hope you truly enjoy the exhibit.
Well, Andy, you're mixing your metaphors, but nonetheless, a very interesting presentation once more. And as I noted at the outset, so many of these most famous of baseball players are coincidentally Knights of Columbus through their histories too. It's interesting because one of the questions that has come up is you cited that Wee Willie Keeler and that Joe DiMaggio were the two players in Major League history with the longest hitting streaks, at least at that time. And a lot of people don't realize that while he was in the minors, he had that even longer hitting streak
Yeah.
that's so often overlooked. But you obviously throughout the presentation alluded to Babe Ruth, who is among the most notable of baseball players of all time, and certainly celebrated by Knights of Columbus as one of the more famous members throughout the 140-year history of the order.
Yep.
In your research, the questioner asks, you you mentioned all of these famous baseball players and the accomplishments that they had on field. Who, in your opinion, is the baseball player that probably was the most committed to the Knights of Columbus and its formal activities of charitable outreach and of service?
That's a good question, actually. So I don't know if you could still see my screen here, but this is
I can.
This is Danny Murtaugh, who is the manager of the Pittsburgh
Pirates.
Pirates when they won the World Series back in 1960. Then, like 10 years later, um, he was actually voted as the Knight of the Year. I want to say in like 1972. There is actually a picture from it in the gallery. So there, and one of his relatives wrote this really touching Columbia article several years ago and talked about how he was very reverent of the Eucharist, and apparently nuns would reach out to this relative and say, like, look how Danny Murtaugh receives the Eucharist. It's just so powerful. I mean, what better example now with the National Eucharistic Revival by the USCCB? What better example is that? So I would say he's up there in terms of actually participating in Knights of Columbus's events. He would show up to funerals. He would be part of our honor guards and other activities. So yeah, there's a little bit about backing. So the exhibit actually bookends with two famous home runs. One of them being the homer in the Gloman, which was hit by Knight of Columbus Cabby Hartnett of the Chicago Cubs, and then with the 1960 World Series. But I'd focus more on Danny Murtaugh in that, and his managerial style and also his faith. So good question. I would say it's him.
Excellent, Danny
Here in this
Murtaugh.
exhibit.
So I note personally, the connection that the Knights have had not only with baseball but also with the two world wars.
Yeah.
You alluded to that in the second base portion of your exhibit, how Knights who were baseball players volunteered to go overseas, and then once more during this presentation cited it for Knights during the 1940s who were former players or active at least in the game of baseball, and who decided upon accepting what military service they were called to, or even volunteering for, and spreading the game of baseball as ambassadors of goodwill, I suppose,
Yeah.
as well as U.S. servicemen. The connection is strong between the Knights of Columbus and the game of baseball, but the connection is also very strong between the Knights of Columbus and the United States military.
Yeah, I would say so. That would be another exhibit for another day. But there's plenty more to discuss about that because I mean, if anyone is curious, you could go on kfc.org, and if you search like World War II or Vietnam War, or Korean, the Korean War, um, I've done a lot of articles about those specific wars as well. So if you want to learn more about that connection, it's great. And also, I am wearing my Warriors to Lords shirt. So even currently, the Knights of Columbus and its association with the military is still strong and still active, trying to help people reorient their life back to finding faith. Um, yeah, in the military. So it's honoring those who served. So it's a very powerful connection.
Indeed, it is. So, next question is: in all your research, what's the most astounding fact that you've uncovered about the Knights in baseball? What's your favorite discovery?
Favorite discovery would probably be that Joe DiMaggio it made his first degree as a Knight of Columbus. It wasn't in any of the records or whatnot, but it was in featured in Columbia magazine, and just that alone was like, like what? I was dumbfounded. So that was really like, and that was a few years into my time at the Knights and already researching all this. So the fact that that came up was I have to thank Ann Austin Darp, who might be listening, who forwarded me that. I'm like, holy mackerel, this has to go in the exhibit. So thank you to her. And yeah, that was just an incredible find.
I think it's fun too that you noted that during the course of his hitting streak, people weren't even mentioning him by name. It was such a nationwide phenomenon that
Yeah,
people were just asking, did he have a hit? And everyone assuming that they know it was DiMaggio. Um, how riveting it was that it captivated the interest of an entire national population.
yeah, like pre World War One, obviously, like right on the the antebellum years, if you will, or but it's yeah, it's just fat. I would recommend watching that documentary, especially that portion. You might be able to find it on YouTube, but it's yeah, it can't be overstated enough how much of a phenomenon DiMaggio was, especially in that time, and as Mr. Coffee. So it's he and so it extended far beyond his baseball career. So
Oh my gosh. Um, well, Andy, that's it for the questions that we have. Is there anything more that you'd like to share? If not, I'll tell our viewers that to see the next portion of the exhibit, to see all three portions of the exhibit that are now available for online viewing, just go to michaelmcgivneycenter.org, and right there from the homepage, you can scroll to see a link to the baseball exhibit, and it will bring you to your choice of viewing sections 1, 2, or 3, and the accompanying galleries that are present with each of them. There's also a drop-down link at the top of the page for online exhibits, so you'll be able to find the listing of it there. Um, I'm very grateful, Andy, once more for your participation. You mentioned earlier that we've still one more episode or
still
segment
one more.
of the,
Yeah.
we're going to bring it on home, so to speak, as we turn our season to the playoffs. And we don't have a precise date now, but expect that sometime in early October, as baseball enters its postseason, we will be back and showcasing that final segment. And can you give us a little tease as to what that's going to entail?
So it's kind of perfect that we talked about Danny Murtaugh being the last sort of the end of the exhibit, but we're really focuses on men of faith, men of charity that have still impacted the game of baseball and played in the majors and are trying to evangelize. So that's really what that portion of the exhibit is about. It's the spiritual coming home as well, focusing on what matters most in life. It's to 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 make it back to our spiritual home. So and these there are examples of Knights of Columbus members who have to play baseball or made it or still on rosters that are doing just that for their teammates and for their communities and for their families. So that's the tease for home.
Beautiful. Keeping life always in perspective.
Exactly.
Well, Andy Fowler, thank you. Thank you to all of our online visitors today. God bless you. Until October, keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah.
Swing for the
Thank you.
fences.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you everyone.